Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's session, where we're going to be talking about designing experiences for the Chinese consumer. A bit about Aleph before we start. We are a design and engineering company, and we design and engineer digital products. Representing Aleph today, myself, I'm Eric. I'm Chief Growth Officer at Aleph. And with me today, I've got Jerry, who is the MD for Aleph in Australia. Jerry, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Eric. So as we know, Chinese consumers and market present an incredible opportunity for Australian brands and all the brands across APAC region. So we have done quite a bit of work in creating and building product experience for that audience. So especially we have gone on a journey of building a new bank that's serving a very niche segmentation, the Chinese customers who are living or going to live in Australia. But when we jump on a journey, the first question we ask is, how do we create a product that resonate with this group of people, this community? We actually define some principles before we start the journey. We call desire versus function. So we know we need to understand the audience desires, what they want, what they need, what their key jobs to be done. And also we need to balance that with a product that not only provide useful utilities, but also we also know we need to balance between personal and scalability. We know consumers who love to interact with brands on a hyper-personal level nowadays, expecting more personalized content, applications, and products. At the same time, brands need to operate on a global scale while providing personalized experience. Those have become the principles that guide us through creating a product and designing product. As a first step of building or create a product, we normally conduct landscape review to understand, who are the key players, current capabilities, and trends in the market as well. So if you look at retail banking in Australia, the major players and banks, we find the traditional banks like CBA, ANZ, Westpac, and NAB, those are big four, are still dominating the retail banking market. Having said that, neobanks like Up, 86400, Board, as well as fintech players like Afterpay, ZPay, they start eating the pie of big banks by offering innovative product offerings, like buy now, pay later. Also best-in-class experience, like all the neobanks offer. If you shift our focus from Australia to China, by looking to the retail banking landscape, a similar situation happening over there. The traditional big banks still have the majority of the retail banking market share, like ICBC, Bank of Communication, etc. But when it comes to payment, especially mobile payments in China, it becomes extremely competitive. WeChat Pay, Alipay are the most popular and have the most market share due to the advantage of their own platform. Namely social media integration from WeChat, e-commerce integration, and worldwide merchant network offered by Alipay. Those are the trends and exciting capability we are seeing from the two different markets from a retail banking point of view. But when we come to building and designing a product for Chinese consumers, there's also some key learnings, some assumptions that we validated through our journeys of building a product and doing research. There are some key learnings I'm really keen to share with you guys here. So firstly, we call it help me to be more cashless. We found customers, especially Chinese customers, feel their banking offering should support cashless payment. But their lifestyle shouldn't be restricted or restrained by physical cash. And the need of physical cash or currencies is sold yesterday to the Chinese consumer. Secondly, wealthy is healthy. So Chinese consumer expect a highly competitive interest rate when it comes to saving product. But they do also expect their bank or their banking solutions to support them to grow their wealth goals, especially from a younger age. So thirdly, we found people, especially Chinese consumers, want to have highly personalized experience and product offerings, from the little car art to the discount offer you have, or even the actual product offerings. Those highly personalized experiences become appealing, particularly to younger demographic. Last but not least, they expect many ways to pay within the banking app or other means. With the phenomenon of WeChat, Alipay, the bank must support payment method beyond traditional means. Similar to the being cashless in the physical world, digital banking solution or alike should aim to support payments across the whole ecosystem and platform. Similarly, as what's been done in China, that what the consumer is really expecting over there.
I think it's interesting, Jerry, how you talk about certain elements of design that and certain features that are very specific to the Chinese consumer, like the focus on saving versus spending. If you look at the whole concept of 1111, like it is about spending, but it's also about making the most savings out of that spending, right? So there's a real focus on it. I think another thing that we've really seen, and it's like blatantly obvious, is this rise of the super app. I remember years ago when the West was really still focused on kind of really single proposition mobile applications. Like you had the Google Sheets app, you had the Google this app, you had the Google that app. And China came up with this new UX paradigm of this super app application that allows you to combine things like social, chat, but also many financial products inside of that. And now what we've seen is that UX paradigm of the UX of the super app has kind of trickled into work that we're doing across the region as well. Like for example, our work with UOB, which for the ones that don't know is one of the larger banks in the region, but headquartered out of Singapore. They're also the Mighty application, the name in itself, tries to be that super app that connects not just your current account, savings account, but all your products like credit card, and beyond that, the ability to hunt for kind of credit card deals in there as well. And those deals are supported by kind of ratings as well. So this whole super app concept is really coming back into the work that we're doing for our clients as well. Another good example is the work for Permata Bank. Used to be number 12 bank, is now up there in the top 10 banks. They pushed really hard into their own version of the super app concept, where users are able to invest, manage their account, all of it in this one application as well. So this whole design paradigm of super app is kind of slowly from starting in China has gone across the region as well, and it really spurred us to think about why is that the case. And when we did that research together with a client that wanted to take some work from the West and make it applicable in China, there's a couple key things that came up. One is this difference between high context and low context cultures, right? So a low context culture is more direct. That's one way of explaining it. Whereas those within high context culture, you need to take much more into account facial expression, body language, changes in tone, or even just generally, whatever the context is around what is being said. And if you think about this whole super app concept, it adds so many layers of context into that single product application. So it works really well for a high context culture like the Chinese versus low context culture like maybe a more classic Western like German or Scandinavian culture would be. Like a good example is, you know, the word no. In the West, you know, we all know the saying no means no. But if we talk to our Chinese colleagues and the research that we've done and some of the, you know, third-party research that we've seen, no might not mean no in a Chinese context, right? No might mean call me tomorrow, we'll talk again. No might mean like let's take a rating check. No might mean like whatever your parents say or let's go eat. It really depends on the context of where that no is being said, and vice versa. The same for yes, I guess, right? And again, this reflects back into design itself. If you look at Youku, if you look at the way the navigation is designed, how it might reflect in that is that designing for the Chinese consumer might mean giving the user much more upfront, giving them a lot more context, because the Chinese consumer wants to have that context upfront to be able to make a decision, to be able to take that step forward. So when you look at this design from the Western lens, it might look like complicated, it's cluttered, there's a lot on that page. But from a Chinese perspective, this might be super convenient, right? Just like that super app thinking that we discussed before, having that all up front is super convenient. I'll take another example of McDonald's. If you look at McDonald's in the US, it's very simple, it's very minimal. It focuses on getting the user to their job to be done. But then when you look at McDonald's in China, it feels more busier. There's more content and it can be perceived as more cluttered, but actually for a Chinese consumer, just gives them much more context and it makes it very convenient for them to make their decision. Which then kind of, you know, brings you to this question of what do people accept, what do people believe, what do people value, what do people trust, you know, and how does this help them make certain decisions? And one of the things that we saw is this whole concept of the granularity of cultural kind of dimensions. Right? We talked about the high context culture versus low context culture, but there are different kind of really granular ways to look at culture. Is it an egalitarian culture or is it a culture that embraces hierarchy? And this is again not a West versus East thing. Even if you look at the West, Germany embraces hierarchy, whereas the Netherlands is much more egalitarian. So you can get really granular in your thinking about the different cultures. You know, is the Chinese culture comfortable with uncertainty or uncomfortable with uncertainty? Are they more individualistic or more collectivist, right? And then how do you use that to design for the Chinese consumer? I think a really good example of this whole trust is the difference between Airbnb, we'll call it Singapore, which has probably even more Western mindset, versus Airbnb China. If you look at Airbnb Singapore, it's minimal. There's fewer elements in the viewport. But then if you look at Airbnb China, there's colorful tags. It kind of distracts your eye to a Western eye, right? But for a Chinese eye, it might give you more information to work with. There's an active search bar, and interestingly, they put much more upfront the reviews, right? They've made those reviews visible right away. And like when we're doing our research around trust and even in the banking applications, you know, when you hide your reviews or when you put them one layer down, a Chinese consumer might think, why are you hiding them? Do you have something to hide? Whereas for a Western eye, they might think it's too cluttered when you have all of that up front. So I guess look, the big takeaway for me, and I think Jerry for you as well, is these 3 points, right? Validate your assumptions, design for diversity, and be context aware. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think those are the very helpful tips that useful for designing, especially for designing Chinese consumers, right? I mean, the first point you mentioned validate your assumptions. I think it's really about remove bias and keep being curious. You know, just engaging and conduct research with your real customers when you're designing and building a product. I think a couple of things you mentioned about designing for diversity as well around.
I think just to jump in on this designing for diversity, of course, in these 20 minutes, we talk about it as one homogeneous group, but it's not one homogeneous group, right?
Yeah.
You've got Chinese consumer who's never left mainland China. If you're talking about the Chinese consumer in Australia and New Zealand, you've got the difference between first generation Chinese, second generation Chinese, and we just feel that those different kind of cultural benchmarks helps you get really granular. And I guess that's the third point as well, be very context aware.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about jobs to be done. And I think exactly like you said, like jobs to be done is very singular minded in its proposition. But for the Chinese consumer, you have to think a lot about what's around that jobs to be done that helps the Chinese consumer make a decision. So be very context aware.
Yeah, 100%. Right. I mean, to close off, I think, as said, the Chinese consumer and market present an incredible opportunity for all the brands around the region. But based on what Eric and myself shared, you might understand it has its own culture complexity and diversity as well. So keep that in mind when you're building your next product, especially for Chinese consumers and market. All right, thank you for having us.